Well, good morning, and the Lord be with you. This is a reading from Matthew chapter 5, verse 5. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation to come this morning. This is wonderful. Methodist dogs are much better behaved than Roman Catholic dogs. This morning. I'd like to thank Pastor Kelly and Sharon and the people who planned this liturgy, Marilyn Hare and the Steele family, and all of you for the invitation to be here today to talk to you. And I'd like to thank my son Will Braden, who is an independent filmmaker and who's filming this for you and for me to use in my class. And ironically and appropriately, Will's short film about our cat Henry was shown in the Seattle International Film Festival last summer. So we are gathered today for a very ancient rite of the Christian faith to ask God's blessing on the creatures that populate our lives. I have been pondering quite a bit about what the presence of our pets means for us in a theological sense. At the end of the summer that saw both our amazement that Leona Helmsley's Maltese dog inherited $12 million and our horror at the charges leveled against Michael Vick, it's a good time to perhaps ask, why should we come together today for this ceremony? I profess two important truths from my own heart. First, that I am reconciled to God through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And second, that I chose the subject of geography through which I claim my understanding of the world. This is what I profess. And therefore, I am happy to get a paycheck from Seattle Pacific as a professor. When I bring these two professions together, I ask, where can I find guidance in Scripture for me as a geographer? And particularly as a geographer who has spent time looking at issues of conservation of species and the ways that humans relate to the other aspects of God's creation. About 12 years ago, an SPU student sent me on a quest. We were discussing Genesis in class, and she asked me, Professor Braden, why do you think God created the animals? I realized I had no profound answer for her, but my instinctive response was, because it gave him pleasure. We know from Genesis, as Pastor Kelly said with the children, that God pronounced his creation good, and that he had a specific plan in mind for the animals who populate this world with us. Therefore, these wonderful pets, all animals, wildlife and pets alike, who join us in the world are not just window dressing, and they're not just put here for our use or our misuse, or even our pleasure, or even to dress them up in funny costumes at Halloween. I've come to believe that animals help define our humanity. And it's not just because sometimes you need an idea of other to know who you are. I think animals bring out both the best and the most compassionate in us, as well as our worst propensity to cause them harm. My quest to understand God's call to us about animals sent me first to chapter 1 of the Bible, and theologians who argued that we were given the role of stewards of creation, tenders or guardians. And by the way, some animal rights advocates now say we should not refer to ourselves as pet owners. We are now pet guardians. And last summer, Wayne Pacell, who is the president of the Humane Society, was at a national meeting, and he decided to make a joke, and he said, we can't call them dogs anymore. They are now canine Americans. Well, NPR and NBC reported this, and then they had to issue a retraction that, come on, Mr. Pacell was only kidding. Now, I like thinking of us as responsible stewards of our canine Americans, or whatever you'd like to call them. But I felt on my quest that there was something more for my understanding than just stewardship alone. And my search finally led me to the scripture we heard today, in Matthew 5, and the Sermon on the Mount, particularly the verse, "The meek shall inherit the earth." When the Lord of creation states something that emphatically about this planet and the inhabitants of this planet, a geographer like me pays attention. Not being a biblical scholar, I consulted various works about the Beatitudes, and finally, the writing of theologian Hans-Dieter Beetz opened my eyes. He hearkened us back to Psalm 37, verse 11, which reads, "But the meek shall inherit the earth and shall delight themselves in the abundance of peace." So, what does this word meek mean? And what does it mean for us who are here today to ask God's blessing on these animals? Professor Beetz says, meekness is not just humility. It's something a lot more difficult for us human beings. Meekness means restraint. It means the choice not to exercise power when we could exercise power. It is to give ourselves over to God's sovereignty. When I think about meekness in this light and our attitude towards animals in many, if not all of the world's cultures, it helps me understand the fury that some of us feel inside when we see someone abusing a dog or a cat. It is just not fair to have all that power and no moral conscience about using it, no restraint. It is probably the same reaction of heartache and anger we feel when confronted with someone abusing a child. The suffering of the innocent at the hands of unrestrained and evil power is an injustice almost too much to bear. Likewise, we look at the uncontrolled and unaccountable misuse of the earth and its resources and the destruction of habitat for species, and that just strikes us as not fair. Jesus tells us to behave differently. He spells out who is entitled to inherit this earth, not to use it as we want, but to use it in obedience to God. Now, the flip side of this emotional coin is the love that God places in our hearts, the mercy and the tenderness toward the helpless, toward those over whom we could have power, but we know that power is given to us by God. And it's actually a call for stewardship and care and responsibility. So I find in Matthew 5 the building of a great doxology of praise. And the song that we had with the children here was a wonderful example of that doxology. We join all the creatures of this earth, whom Paul tells us are also groaning for God's redemption. We show them restraint and mercy. We show love and mercy to our pets. We care for them, we value them, and we weep when it's time to bid them goodbye. And as today we ask God to bless them, and I am so glad that Pastor Kelly has reminded us we need to bless the ones who have left us as well. We are grateful for the joy that they bring to us, the witness that this world was not created for us alone. And above all, we love them. And in that love, we open up another window to the pleasure of God. I teach a class for freshmen at Seattle Pacific, and it's called Are There Dogs in Heaven? And I'd like to share with you, to conclude, the poem that my students have to use to write their final exam. Ultimately, they don't know this yet, but I'll tell you, we just started this past week. Ultimately, I don't care if their answer to that question about dogs in heaven is yes or no. There are great Christian thinkers on both sides of that debate. But I do want the students to see that in one way, the answer doesn't matter. When we love our pets and we seek their well-being and blessing, we already know heaven. Sometimes we know it because it's just so painful when our pets die. But that pain is a blessing too. It's a reminder of how profound is our human capacity for love. So I'll conclude by reading this poem, and I hope I can read it without blubbering, because I do sometimes, by Robinson Jeffers, the American poet. He wrote this poem right after his dog Haig died in 1941. And I think it maybe expresses words that your pet might say today to thank you for this blessing. The poem is called The House Dog's Grave. I've changed my ways a little. I cannot now run with you in the evenings along the shore, except in a kind of dream. And you, if you dream a moment, you see me there. So leave a while the paw marks on the front door where I used to scratch to go out or in, and you'd soon open. Leave on the kitchen floor the marks of my drinking pan. I cannot lie by your fire as I used to do on the warm stone, nor at the foot of your bed. No, all the night through I lie alone. But your kind thought has laid me less than 6 feet outside your window, where firelight so often plays, and where you sit to read, and I fear often grieving for me. Every night your lamplight lies on my place. You, man and woman, live so long, it is hard to think of you ever dying. A little dog would get tired living so long. I hope that when you are lying under the ground like me, your lives will appear as good and joyful as mine. No, dear, that's too much hope. You are not so well cared for as I have been, and never have known the passionate, undivided fidelities that I knew. Your minds are perhaps too active, too many-sided, but to me you were true. You were never masters, but friends. I was your friend. I loved you well and was loved. Deep love endures to the end and far past the end. If this is my end, I am not lonely. I am not afraid. I am still yours.